The Najdorf Sicilian is overrated. I don't take these words lightly, and I don't say it lightly either. I think that the Najdorf, although played at pretty much every level, has some key problems with it that just aren't going to be resolved, and it's likely going to carry over into other openings as well. The problem is it's easy to prepare against now. There are so many lines that you can play that not only give white equality against the Najdorf, but still pose a practical problem. What this means is that you're going to need to know quite a bit if you're playing the Najdorf variation. And that can be a little bit annoying to think about because normally people will play the Sicilian because they're hoping that their tactical prowess and their strategical prowess will be the real thing to punish their opponents. In my classical game, I was playing in round 4. I had a pretty good event so far, not super great, not super bad, somewhere in the middle, a little bit better than average though. I had the white pieces against someone named Bordas, and here I played e4. And we end up getting into a Sicilian after d6, d4, takes, knight f6, knight c3, and a6. And here, there are a lot of moves that white can play. One of them is bishop to g5, bishop to e3, bishop to e2, I think maybe bishop to d3, h3, a3, I think even a4. There's just too many moves, and kind of all of these are okay. And in the Najdorf, there's a saying that there's no more main lines and sidelines anymore, there's just lines. And this quote comes directly from one of the coaches of none other than Gukesh. This is something that you have to take seriously, especially if it's such a strong player saying that. But I took these words quite seriously, and I played a move that I'm very happy with that coach also recommended in his Chessable course. Rook to g1. Now, the idea behind this move is actually similar to h3. The whole idea is that black sometimes wants to go for a d5 break, but also this knight's just very annoying. So with rook to g1, the idea is eventually just playing g4 and g5. These are useful moves because you're starting an attack on the king side, but it's also useful because positionally, if you can kick that knight away from f6, d5 is less controlled, and so is e4. This is actually something that can be very useful. So black has to play quickly. Either they can play very aggressively with b5, where the lines get absolutely insane, and in all honesty, I don't know them as well as I should, or you could play them with e5, which is exactly what my opponent did. But after knight to b3, he didn't play one of these standard moves. One of them is h5. The idea is just to prevent g4, but you could try to play this anyways with the move h3 and going g4 next. On the other hand, there's also a nice idea of bishop to e6, and here after g4, you're just in time to play d5. The one thing white was trying to do, preventing d5, unfortunately allows it anyways. However, this endgame is quite complicated, and I have kind of okay results in this endgame that happens after taking just a bunch on the d5 square, queen takes, and yeah, you play this one out. I ended up beating a national master earlier in the year that this game took place, which is something I'm still very proud of. But bishop to e6 wasn't played. Instead, bishop to e7 was, and already this is quite dubious because now g4 comes, and even if you play something like h6, what do? Well, the whole point of rook g1 and g4 was to displace that knight. There's nothing else to consider other than h4, and that's exactly what I did. My opponent played bishop to e6. I don't know if the idea was to go for d5 or if after g5 they wanted to bring their knight back to d7, but that's what ended up happening after takes and knight f to d7. This was probably, I don't want to say the losing move, but this is actually probably losing for black already. Instead, maybe knight to h5 played on just a little bit longer, where eventually you could bring your knight to f4. Even if it's a pawn sacrifice, it feels a little bit necessary here. You could also play g6 to try to keep things closed enough on this side of the board, but it doesn't really work out too well. White does have a considerable advantage here. Instead, after knight f to d7, we can see that white has a lot of space. the h-file open, which means that castling short is not a good idea, but also where else will that king go? And also, yeah, they're a little bit behind in development, especially compared to white. It might not seem like it at first. After all, they do have 3 pieces developed to white's 2, but it matters also how the pieces are going to continue to develop. So, for example, bishop to e3 comes really nicely. So does, I guess, queen c7 or knight c6. But after queen d2, knight b6, and castles long, all of white's pieces are on the right squares. The knights are doing really well. The bishops are looking pretty good as well. Here, the rook on d1 is very active, covering the d file. The rook on g1 is doing an important job covering the g5 pawn, and also making sure that black doesn't get any ideas of castling, because then rook to h1 might come, and there might be problems on this h file since it's already opened up. Instead, my opponent played knight 8 to d7, where I played king to b1. This is one of those standard moves in these positions, just pushing the king over one square, just to make sure, first off, if bishop g5 ever could come, it's not with check. And also, if queen takes c2 comes, then at the very worst case scenario, you do have king to a1, which could stave off a checkmating attack in some very rare scenarios. Generally, king b1 is a good move to play. My opponent played bishop to c4 with the idea of trying to trade off, and it also has the added benefit that if I were to take, then after knight takes on c4 and queen e2, they could try maybe just taking on e3 and saying that they got rid of the 2 bishops and they have a bishop against a knight. I wouldn't really say that this is so great though. Imagine a knight getting to d5. This would not really end well for my opponent. But it's a little understandable what the idea could be. Also, even here after queen e2, maybe knight a3 check is a little annoying too. Because if you take it, then they can take on c3. And moving back to c1 is a little sad. Or even, I guess, king to a1 is playable as well. Just, I didn't see a point in allowing any of this, so I went for a little bit of a different move. Remember, white is pretty much better developed. So we want to create a little bit of play and be a little bit more aggressive here. And that's exactly why I played the move knight to d5. Now, this threatens to change the position a little bit. They're able to take on d5, but is it really something you want to do? For example, bishop takes on d5 isn't really something that you definitely want to do after e takes on d5, because now eventually you might even be able to go rook c1 and c4, c5 to try to attack that c file, especially after something like long castles. But instead, my opponent played knight takes on d5, just making sure that they could trade off one of the bishops, but I think this works out quite nicely for me. After e takes on d5, I do have a little bit of a threat here that I was kind of hoping my opponent would notice, and it turns out they didn't. They played the move a5. So if you want to guess what white's strategic threat is here, I would really encourage you to consider the position and ask yourself, where are the weak spots? This is going to be something that comes up quite a bit in this game because there's going to be a lot of unusual weaknesses that you might not think are weak at first. So I played queen to c3. It turns out it's actually quite hard to deal with the c file. The bishop being pinned by, well, my queen against their queen creates some unique problems where even if they're able to defend it with moves like b5, it's not really something that they want to do. Here, I have a good move in knight to d2, just adding more pressure onto the piece. And after rook to c8 to defend once again, I am pretty happy to finally take. Now, I actually would give bishop takes c4 an exclam over knight takes c4, which looks like the better move generally. The reason why I say the better move is because normally when you think about trading off a bishop off the board, you want to trade a knight for a bishop, not really a bishop for a bishop. But it turns out the knight on d2 is very effective in a lot of different positions, whereas the bishop on f1, I mean, it's doing a good job. It's covering some important squares, for example, c4, d3, b5 on this diagonal, and maybe it could be useful in this one in the future. But it feels like its time has passed, and this knight looks like it could be a lot more useful, specifically the fact that it's covering c4, but it's also covering e4, and that's actually something that might come up a little bit later. So with bishop takes on c4 and b takes on c4, now I'm ready to create an attack that is very nice. Rook to g4. This is very obvious what I'm trying to do. I want to take that c4 pawn. And here my opponent castles. Maybe something like queen b7 could be considered, but I would be interested in taking nonetheless. They don't have time to take on d5 thanks to the rook on c8. So yeah, if they take on c4, I would just take back with the queen, and I would consider this a pretty big success. White has probably still a winning advantage here. Instead, with castles, this was kind of the problem altogether when we look back from bishop to e7 at the start of the game. With bishop to e7, they didn't have time to deal well with the idea of g4 and g5. And it's kind of coming to fruition now. I'm able to play moves like rook to h1 and create an attack on the h-file all of a sudden, because their king wasn't really safe. Here, long ago, they probably should have castled long, but they didn't really come to that conclusion, because in the Najdorf, you almost never see those ideas. And yeah, that's a pretty hard thing to do, especially after you've traded off your c-pawn. It's just like trading off your f-pawn and still casting short. It can feel a little bit weird, but also it could be a very useful thing, especially if a rook got to the f-file. Yeah, so just trying to understand things a little bit more strategically there. So yeah, castles, rook to h1, but rook takes on c4 was likely just better, where after queen to b7, I can actually take on a5 and just be as greedy as possible. This is quite nice. Black definitely has a lot of issues where they're down 2 pawns of material. I could still play rook h4 and rook h1, and the attack is still coming, where I'm also up material. This is just a winning position. But with rook h1, yeah, it just is a little bit less accurate. So f5 was played, and f5 is a very, very interesting move because I don't really want to take. Where after takes, now knight takes can be played, and it looks like d5 is under threat. Obviously, my rook is under threat. And I'm kind of allowing black into the game a little bit. Instead, I take on c4. So this comes with tempo, and it means that I can save my bishop because f4 is actually going to trap this piece. But after queen to b7, I had different plans. I realized that I actually could just play rook to c6 here. And the idea behind rook to c6 is it's just improving a piece. Rook to c6 means that I don't have to worry about rook takes c4 in this position. For example, if I'd play a4, just like kind of a normal looking move, maybe they could always take on c4. Again, there's still f4 stuff going on, but they could, yeah, again, take on c4 and then play something like rook to c8. With rook to c6, that's no longer possible because after rook takes on c6, I can take and I am just forking their pieces. The queen and the knight are both attacked, and even something like rook c8, it just doesn't work because if we count the material at the end, they're down a rook. They had to give up their rook for my queen because I could recapture it at the end. So yeah, here they played f4, thinking they were winning my bishop, but you can see that they're playing very aggressively in positions where their king is kind of open, and this is going to help me open up lines if I really wanted to. For example, g6 does win the game. I didn't play this because I was a little bit worried about taking, and then rook f4, but this actually wins, and the idea is queen to h3. I'm threatening queen e6 and also just the immediate queen to h8. But then there's rook h4. And this is where you have to see queen e6 check, king h8, rook takes h4, bishop takes h4, and queen back to h3. And this is, of course, winning because you're going to be taking the bishop on h4. I did not see this, though. I did realize that, yeah, g6 probably works out for me. But I also wanted to kind of flex my calculation muscles a bit. I realized that I could just fully get away with the move, not that move, bishop to a7. And I'm very proud of this move. It's not the most accurate, but this is still winning all the same. And the whole idea is this bishop can't be touched. If you ever try taking this bishop, I can take on c8. And if you ever try trading first, I can still just allow that to happen. I believe queen c4 check could even be played here, rook f7, and then maybe g6. This looks like it's completely winning to me. Maybe there's some sort of refutation, but I simply don't see it. So I'm going to call this a win for white. But with bishop to a7, yeah, it's just something that my opponent was quite shocked to see. And maybe you were as well. Hopefully you were, because, I mean, it's kind of a shocking move if you're not really looking for it. Yeah, and so they decided to just take on g5, make sure that g6 doesn't come, and also it's a pawn. So yeah, if you're getting attacked, might as well take material. As Yasser Serouan says, it's better to die with a full tummy, at least. So I played the move knight to e4. This attacks the bishop on g5, and after bishop to e7, I play queen c4. Remember, this bishop's still not able to be taken, so I'm not really worried about any queen takes on a7, because again, I end up winning a rook in the end. Or in exchange, I should say. And the other idea here is that after takes, now I can take on c6, and it's also a check. So this also is quite a nice thing to think about here. And yeah, again, the weakness right now is all of the light squares. When you see these light squares, you could see that a move like queen c4 makes total sense. And yeah, it's another one that I'm pretty happy with. So they played king to f7. I think the idea here was king to e8, trying to get out of just any issues on this diagonal. But I have the move f3. This wasn't the best move. Instead, I could also just play a4, and there's not really a rush, which is pretty interesting. But I'm happy with f3. The idea is bishop f2 whenever I need it. I don't have to worry about some sort of like rook a8 ruining my day. Right now it doesn't because of rook to c7. I should probably show that, where this knight will be hanging at the end here. So that would be a win for me. But yeah, my opponent played rook f to d8, and I brought my bishop back to f2. And after knight to f8, it's time to reassess the position. I want to give you guys essentially an exercise here. What are black's weaknesses? So I just mentioned it, but I think now we need to start changing things up. Hopefully you've had enough time to pause. I think the biggest weakness, surprisingly, in black's position, of course these squares are kind of weak, but I would actually say the weakest square in the position is c7. And maybe even b6 and d6. And this is exactly what my thought was during the game. I started with knight to c3. This knight was very strong on e4, but it could be a little bit stronger. The one problem with it is it wasn't covering c7 as well. So I want to play, after knight g6, a4. And after rook to b8, now I can play knight to b5. And I'm covering c7 and d6 now. And to me, this felt really nice. So my opponent ended up playing rook d to c8, and now it's time to bring in pretty much the last piece into the attack. It feels like this rook would be the last piece, but I think it's this bishop. I played bishop to b6. The idea here is very simple. I'm going to play bishop to c7, and then I'm going to take on d6. This pawn is going to fall, and once it falls, I pretty much just win the game. And that's actually what happened. So queen to d7, bishop to c7, they played rook b7, and I took on d6. Now you can't take here because after knight takes on d6, I end up getting to win the rook here. And after queen takes on d6, I believe the best thing would be to just take on c8. If I take on d6, then they can take on c4, so we want to avoid that. But after rook to d8, instead, I take on e7. Just trading knight to e7 here would not be so great. First off, rook d6 looks really strong, but also something like d6 looks like a bit of a problem, where I could trade queens and just take on e7. This looks winning to me. So yeah, queen takes e7 was played. And the problem with d6 here is queen e6, and yeah, I'm probably winning, but I don't see the follow-up immediately. So I decided to just play queen to e4. This pawn is very frustrating to deal with. My rook is very frustrating to deal with. My knight is very frustrating to deal with. And sometimes that's enough. If you could just find one little move that just kind of increases the pressure, maybe creates a new threat, and just continues doing what you're already doing, that's enough. You don't always need to force the action, especially if you think you're better. And here, yeah, I'm better, clearly. All of my pieces are working together. I'm up a pawn. That's a big deal. So after queen to e4, my opponent played knight to f8. I went rook to h5, just targeting e5. There's also an argument for queen f5 check, but I didn't see a point. I just thought rook to h5 is simple enough where I'm threatening to take. And if they play something like g5, they're creating even more weaknesses. So they played rook d7, and I took on e5. Now, this also defends the d5 pawn, so I don't have to worry about rook takes d5 anymore. And they played queen to h4. And again, what would you do here if you had the white pieces? I think that you might think, oh, let's try something like rook f5 check, and then like rook takes f8 or something like that. And this is definitely playable, but for me, I didn't see a point. I don't really need to force the action or look for sacrifices or any sort of crazy finish. Sometimes the best type of win is just making sure that your opponent doesn't really have any real counterplay. And that's why I played b3. b3 just lets me make sure that I can play king to b2 at any moment. It defends a4, keeps things really solid, and it also asks black to make a move in this position, which honestly is not obvious. My opponent played knight to h7. I gave a check on g6, making sure that, yeah, queen f5 check, there's knight f6, so queen g6 check instead. And after king g8, I trade off a pair of rooks here with rook takes on d8, and then I go back to e4, and again ask black to find a move. They gave me a check on h1. I go king to b2. And again, it's kind of hard to find a move for them. They played queen to h5 here. But now I'm ready for knight to c3. This is, again, just kind of one of those reasons I really liked the idea of b3, is just if I ever bring my knight back to c3 and my king to b2, my king feels super safe here, but their king still has some issues. You can imagine like rook c7 and queen to e7 just threatening mate. My opponent ended up playing rook to e8 here, and I took on f4. This pawn was undefended after all. And after knight to g6, I played queen to g3, and this is attacking the knight, and I'm also threatening moves like rook to c7 next. But I also have another idea, which is that after knight to e5, which is what my opponent played, just trying to attack f3, I play rook to e6, and all of a sudden, I'm threatening to trade the rooks, which is a strategic idea for me, where if I can trade off a pair of rooks or just trade off the pieces, then all of the 3 pawns that I'm up here will just be very easy to win with. So they have to trade. Anything else just, of course, loses here. For example, this, and then queen takes f3, or if they play queen takes f3 immediately, I can just take on e5, for example, or take on e8. This is probably easier, actually. But yeah, rook e6 just kind of finishes things off. Where after rook takes e6, I take back, and it also puts them in a weird position where they can't really move any of their pieces, surprisingly. They played knight takes f3, but then I get queen to b8 with check. And this is actually where they resign. If they play queen takes f3, then queen takes e5 just wins the piece. And like a king move of some sort. I mean, f4 looks good too, because I just get to keep that pawn, which there's nothing wrong with. I don't know if there's anything else to consider. That looks good enough to me. Also, maybe e7, just threatening the knight, and also like try to find a move, because if you play anything like queen f7, then I get to take the knight, so it doesn't really work out for them. Yeah, and then king g8, queen f4, for example, is just threatening to win here. So yeah, lots of good options, luckily. But after knight takes f3 and queen b8, they have to play king to h7, but then I play e7, and this move cannot be stopped. I'm going to promote the pawn. So yeah, that was the game. I think it was a pretty interesting one. Again, I would say the one big thing that I'm actually very proud of myself with here, because I do consider this to be one of my better games, and kind of showing why sometimes playing the Najdorf can feel a little impractical, just because you have to play against so many different lines. Even a move like rook to g1 works here. But yeah, I feel really proud of kind of this position where it took me about 2 minutes here to find knight c3, and then 2 minutes to play a4, 2 minutes to play knight to b5, just, doing my basic calculation, making sure I'm not blundering anything. And then another 5 minutes to finally go for that weakness with bishop b6 to c7 to d6. And yeah, overall, a very interesting game and something that I'm pretty proud of. I hope you guys enjoyed it. My cat is making a guest appearance. He is meowing right now. But yeah, that's going to cover it for the game. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one where we cover the final round of this tournament. All right, I'll see you then. Bye-bye.